Hey, it's Trevor again, and I don't think you should watch these real Bigfoot encounters alone because it's too disturbing. But if you're down, we go from a homeowner gradually realizing Bigfoot was repeatedly watching his property from the darkness to a group of witnesses uncovering a series of Bigfoot encounters, signals, and increasingly unsettling signs. Marcus Tilley reported the first sighting. He has been driving long-haul routes through southern Ohio for 11 years. It was just after 3 a.m. when Bigfoot stepped out of the tree line and onto Route 56. He had time to yank the wheel hard, the trailer fishtailing behind him as his tires screamed across the center line. The Sasquatch he saw didn't run. Instead, it moved across the road in a long, fluid stride, like something that had been walking that road since long before Marcus was born. Unhurried, weightless, impossibly smooth for something that stood, by his estimate, at least 9 feet tall. The whole thing was wrong in a way he couldn't name. He pulled the truck to the shoulder and sat there with the engine running and the hazard lights strobing red across the tree line. Nothing moved. He waited 4 minutes, he checked his phone twice, before he got out. He walked to the center of the road where Bigfoot had been standing and stopped. And when I read what he reportedly saw, I felt goosebumps. The asphalt was rippling, not cracked, not buckled. Rippling, the way blacktop looks on a highway in July when the temperature hits triple digits. He knelt down and put his palm flat against it. The surface was warm, warm enough that he pulled his hand back. In 39-degree air, the road beneath where Bigfoot had stood was radiating heat, like a cast-iron skillet pulled off a stove. For that road to be warm enough to feel through a work glove in near-freezing air, something had to have transferred an enormous amount of thermal energy into the surface in the seconds Bigfoot crossed it. That's not a footprint, that's a thermal event. His dashcam footage covers the 12 seconds before and after impact. What it recorded was not footage of Bigfoot. It was 12 seconds of white static and a low-frequency hum. When the image returned, the road was empty, and Marcus was already pulling back onto the shoulder. If you think a melting road is the strangest thing that happened in Ohio that Monday, wait until you hear what a hunting dog found hiding in a tunnel 6 miles away. My name is Dale Pruitt. I'm 47 years old, and I have been hunting the Cascade Range for 23 years, whitetail primarily, and some elk. I know this country the way you know something you've spent 23 seasons inside of. Not perfectly, not completely, but well enough that when something is wrong, you know it before you can explain why. Something has been wrong in this part of the range for 3 years. I noticed it first in the fall of my 21st season. The deer movement was off, not depleted, not disease-related, not the kind of pressure shift you get from a new development or a logging operation, more like a displacement. The deer were avoiding a specific section of the drainage I had hunted for years, a bench of old growth above the creek where the sign had always been heavy. That fall, the sign was thin. The following year, it was thinner. This year, the third year, I walked that bench for 4 days and found nothing. Not one track, not one rub. The deer had vacated a section of prime terrain, and I had no explanation for it. I had a suspicion. I did not say it out loud. I want to tell you what it is like to carry a suspicion like that for 3 years. A normal suspicion has an exit. You investigate, you confirm or deny, you move on. This suspicion had no clean exit. Every time I tried to investigate it, I arrived at the same place. Evidence of a cause I could not name and the particular discomfort of a practical person holding an impractical conclusion. I am a man who has hunted the same drainage for 23 years. What I had been observing was pointing at a word I had spent my whole adult life using as a punchline, and the evidence was not letting me put it down. I had been finding other things on that bench for 2 seasons, things that did not belong to any animal I was prepared to name. Prints first. I found the first one in the second year, pressed into the mud at the creek crossing below the bench. I knew it wasn't bear before I had finished looking at it. The shape was wrong, the stride pattern was wrong, and the size. I have a size 11 boot, and I put it beside the print, and the print was longer than my boot by 1/3 and wider by 1/2. I photographed it. I measured it. I went home and did not tell my wife what I had found. I had been reading Pacific Northwest accounts for 2 years. Late at night, the way you read things you are not ready to admit you are taking seriously. I knew the measurement ranges. What I was looking at in that mud matched precisely, and I was not ready to say what that meant. So I took the photograph and the measurement and drove home and did not say the word Bigfoot to anyone for another 12 months. The second year, I found 3 more prints and something else, a structure. I do not know what else to call it. A collection of branches, each one between 4 and 6 feet long, arranged in a pattern at the base of a Douglas fir on the upper bench. Not fallen, placed. The angles were deliberate. The branches had been broken, not cut, at consistent lengths, and they had been positioned with a care that no windfall or animal activity I knew could produce. I photographed the structure too. I told my brother about the structure that winter over a beer, and he said, "You know what that sounds like." I said, "Don't." He said, "I'm just saying." I said, "I know what it sounds like, and I'm not saying it." He finished his beer, and we moved on to other things, and I spent the next 11 months thinking about it. This was the 3rd year. I came in on October 9th with a plan. I had not shared the plan with anyone because the plan was the kind of plan that sounds reasonable alone in your truck at 2 in the morning, but sounds like something else entirely when you say it to another person. The plan was to find whatever was displacing the deer on the bench, photograph it, and deal with the consequences afterward. I had a trail camera, I had a rifle, I had 11 years of familiarity with this drainage, and I had 3 years of building suspicion that I was done not acting on. I set 6 cameras on the bench and the approach routes on the first day. High on the trees, better angles than I had used in previous seasons, overlapping fields of view, so there was no gap. I had learned something from the accounts I had read, accounts I had been reading for 2 years without admitting to myself why, and the thing I had learned was that you do not leave gaps. I went back to the cabin and I waited. Day 1 produced deer on 2 cameras and nothing on the others. Day 2, the same. Day 3, nothing on any of them. The deer pressure had dropped completely, and I took that as information the way I had learned to take the absence of deer as information on the bench. Day 4, camera 3 went dark at 2:18 in the morning. Not triggered, dark. The battery indicator had been showing full the night before. I checked camera 3 on my handheld unit, and the feed was just gone. No error code, no low battery warning, no motion trigger. Just a timestamp at 2:18 and then nothing. I sat with that for a while. Then I checked the other cameras. Camera 5 had a motion trigger at 2:22, 4 minutes after camera 3 went dark. The image on camera 5 was, I am going to describe this precisely because precision is the only thing I have to offer here. The image was a section of forest floor and lower trunk of a hemlock, and in the right-hand quarter of the frame there was a hand. A hand! Fingers and a palm pressed flat against the bark of the hemlock at a height of approximately 7 feet, in the process of, and I can only describe what the image shows, in the process of reaching for the camera. The image was the last thing camera 5 captured. I drove to the bench before first light the next morning. Camera 3 was on the ground, placed, face up, in the grass below the tree it had been mounted on, the strap cut cleanly. Not torn, cut, with a precision that left both ends of the nylon strap clean. Camera 5 was on the ground in the same condition, strap cut, face up. The other 4 cameras were untouched. I stood at camera 5 for a long time, looking at the clean ends of the nylon strap. Whatever had taken those cameras down had a tool or had something that functioned as one. The cut was not a tooth mark or a tear. It was a single, clean separation. I put the cut end of the strap under my flashlight and looked at it for a long time and thought about what makes a cut like that. I went back to the cabin and I pulled the images from cameras 1, 2, 4, and 6. Camera 6 had captured something I had missed on the initial check. A motion trigger at 1:49 in the morning, 29 minutes before camera 3 went dark. The image was the approach trail from the north, in the dark, motion triggered at the near edge of the frame. What had triggered it was at the far right margin of the image, not centered, not clear. A vertical shape in the near dark that my brain kept trying to organize into something I had a name for. I could not find a name for it. I printed the image at the cabin, 11 by 14 on the portable printer I bring for scouting maps. I pinned it to the wall and I stood in front of it and I looked at it for 2 hours. The vertical shape was the right side of something, the edge of a form that the frame had caught partially, the rest of it beyond the camera's field of view. The portion I could see suggested a height, and I am measuring this against the known dimensions of the trees in the background. That was not consistent with a human figure. The shoulder, if that is what I was seeing, was at a height that would require the figure to be between 7 and 8 feet tall. The surface of the visible portion had a texture that the camera, at that distance and in that light, was rendering as a dark mass with depth, not smooth, not clothing. I had been looking at Bigfoot photographs for 2 years. I knew what I was looking at. I went back to the bench on day 5 with one camera and a different plan. I placed the new camera lower, 4 feet off the ground, on the north approach, aimed at the creek crossing where I had found the first print 2 years before. Wide angle, night vision. I set it and I went back to the cabin and I loaded my rifle. I sat in the blind I had built on the second day, 20 yards from the creek crossing, with my rifle across my knees, and I waited. I want to be clear about what I was thinking in that blind. I was not thinking about shooting a Bigfoot. I have read enough accounts and spent enough time in this drainage to understand that whatever this was, it was not the kind of thing you shoot. What I was thinking about was documentation. I had partial images. I had a handprint on a camera and a shape at the edge of a frame. I needed something better. What I needed was a face. I sat in that blind from 8 in the evening until 1:30 in the morning. The temperature dropped to 22. I had a hand warmer in each pocket, and the rifle was cold across my knees, and the creek made its sound, and the forest was quiet in the particular way it went quiet in this drainage in the dark. The way I had learned to read over 23 seasons. Not the quiet of nothing present, the quiet of everything present and still. I want to tell you what 5.5 hours in a blind is like, because people imagine it as waiting. It is not. It is a specific form of attention, active, total, sustained, that uses everything your body has learned over decades in these mountains. You are receiving at maximum sensitivity, filtering everything through 23 years of accumulated knowledge. The cold helps. By midnight, I was cold to the bone, and my attention was as sharp as I could make it. At 1:40, I heard the creek change. Not a dramatic change, a subtle one. The particular shift in water sound that happens when something crosses, when the current has to move around a new obstacle. I have fished this creek for 11 years. I know that sound. Something was crossing. I did not move. I have spent 23 seasons not moving at the moment of approach, and the training was deeper than any conscious decision. I held the rifle, and I did not move, and I watched the creek through the gap in the blind wall. It came up the near bank. I am going to try to describe what I saw in that moment, and I am going to try to do it without the modifications that fear and shock produce, because I have had 6 days since then to process the image, and I believe I can now describe it close to accurately. It was large. The size of it against the creek bank, a bank I had measured and photographed and knew, put it at between 8 and 8.5 feet. The build was massive in the specific way of something that has never needed to fit through a door or worry about overhead clearance, a kind of scale that exists outside the reference points the human body uses to measure itself. The arms were too long. That is always the thing you notice first in the accounts, and I had always suspected it was description drift. Eyewitness error, the way traumatized memory exaggerates. It is not. The arms were too long in a way that was immediately apparent and immediately wrong, hanging to the knee when it stood fully upright. It moved up the bank and stopped. It was 10 yards from the blind. I could hear it breathing, the breath of it in the cold air, visible, a periodic cloud in the dark at a height that matched what I was seeing. The rhythm of it was slow, measured, not the panting of an animal that had been running. The breathing of something that had arrived at a place it intended to arrive at, and was now doing what it came to do. It stood there for 4 minutes. I timed it. 4 minutes of standing at the creek bank, 10 yards from where I was sitting, while I held the rifle across my knees and did not move. On the 4th minute, it turned its head, directly toward the blind. I do not know how it knew the blind was there. I had built it 4 days prior from natural materials, branches, deadfall, a section of camo netting I had brought in. I had been in it for 5.5 hours. By any measure I know, I was concealed. It looked at the blind for 60 seconds without moving. 60 seconds of direct, fixed attention on a specific point in the darkness, and the specific point was where I was sitting. Then it turned back to the creek. It crouched at the water, not kneeling, a different posture, a deep squat that put it low to the bank, and it drank. It drank from the creek the way an animal drinks, directly, and while it was down at the water, I raised my camera. I had the camera in my pack, not the trail camera. A digital camera, the one I use for scouting photographs, with a night mode I had tested in the cabin the night before. I had not planned to use it in the blind because taking it out of the pack would make noise, and noise in a blind is the thing you spend 23 seasons training yourself never to produce. I made noise. The zipper of my pack, small, a quarter-inch of travel, the sound of it swallowed almost completely by the creek and the night. Almost? I got the camera clear of the pack, and I had it up, and I had my finger on the shutter, and it turned around. Not the slow pivot of an animal responding to sound, the fast, complete rotation of something that had been waiting for it. The head came around, and the body followed, and it was facing me at 10 yards, and it was fully upright, and it was looking at the blind. I took the photograph. One photograph. The flash fired. I had forgotten about the flash. In a blind at 10 yards in the dark, the flash is not a small thing. It is a white explosion, a full millisecond strobe that lit the creek bank and the trees and the thing standing in front of me, like a flare going off in a closed room. It did not run. I want to be specific about that, because running is what everything runs when a flash fires at 10 yards in the dark. Every animal I have ever photographed in a blind, every deer and elk and bear and coyote, runs when the flash fires. The startle response is not optional. It is wired below behavior. This did not run. It stood. It absorbed the flash the way a person absorbs a flash, with a flinch, a brief recoil, and then a return to stillness. And then it looked at me, not at the blind, not at the space where the flash had come from, at me, at the specific location of my face inside the blind, which it could not have seen before the flash illuminated everything, including me. Now it could see me. We looked at each other. I do not have a unit of measurement for what happened in the next 30 seconds. I have 23 seasons of sitting in blinds and waiting for animals, and I know what it is to be looked at by something wild, and I know the quality of that attention, the way an animal registers you as a variable in its environment, a stimulus to classify and respond to. This was not that quality. What was looking at me had organized my presence into something more specific than a stimulus. It had registered me as a particular kind of thing. The same kind of thing it was, perhaps, or a related kind, something that used blinds and cameras and rifles and sat in the dark for 5 hours waiting, something that had been waiting for it the same way it had been waiting for me. Then it turned and walked back to the creek and crossed and went into the trees on the far bank and was gone. I sat in the blind for 40 minutes without moving, not from strategy. I could not move. The thing that happens in the aftermath of extreme adrenaline is not dramatic. It is a stillness, a system shutdown, everything running a check to confirm it is still intact. I sat in the blind and ran the check, and at the end of it, I was intact, and the creek was still making its sound and the forest was quiet again. Then I made the decision. I do not know how to justify what I did next. I have spent every hour since trying to find the justification, and I cannot locate one that holds. What I can tell you is what happened, in the order it happened, because that is all I have to offer. I raised the rifle. It was still visible. On the far bank, moving into the tree line, the shape of it dark against the darker trees. 23 years of muscle memory put the scope on it, and 23 years of trigger discipline did the rest. I fired once. It went down. I am going to say that plainly because there is no other way to say it. I fired once, and it went down on the far bank, and the sound of the shot came back off the ridge, and then there was nothing but the creek and the cold, and what I had just done. I crossed the creek. The water was ice cold at the ford, and I barely felt it. What was on the far bank was not an animal. That is the honest sentence, and I am going to leave it there. The hands, the face, the proportions, everything I had suspected for 3 years was in front of me, and it was real, and it was dead, and I had made it dead, and I stood there with that for a long time. Then I took the head. I had tools in my pack. I am not going to say I planned this, because I do not fully know whether I planned it. I know that I had the tools, and I used them, and I worked in the dark for the better part of an hour, and I put the head in the bag I had in my pack, and I carried it back to the cabin, and I put it in the large cooler I had in the truck, and I locked the cooler, and I sat down at the kitchen table. It was 3:40 in the morning. I called my brother Gary at 6. His name is Gary. He is 51 years old. He has hunted with me for 20 years, and he is the person I trust above anyone else in my life. I told him I had something he needed to see. I told him it was proof. I said, "Gary, I have proof of Bigfoot, and you need to come out here today, and I need you to come alone and tell no one where you're going." He did not ask many questions. "That is Gary," he said. "I'll be there by 10. He was at the cabin by 10 Saturday morning. I showed him the head. Gary has hunted with me for 20 years. He has done the things a man who hunts this country does, and none of them had prepared him for what was in that cooler. He stood at the open lid, and I stood back and watched him go through the same sequence I had gone through alone in the dark at 3 in the morning. The initial read, the moment the brain tries to fit what it's seeing into something it already knows, the moment that fails. His hands were on the cooler lid, and he did not move them for 3 full minutes. When he finally spoke, he said, "Dale, what did you do?" Not a question, the statement of a man who already knows the answer and is trying to understand what it means for both of them. I said, "I know." He said, "We have to take this somewhere. We have to show someone." I said, "That's why I called you." We spent the afternoon going through the options. University researchers, wildlife agencies, the media. Each one had consequences we could see clearly and outcomes we couldn't predict. Gary made coffee. We talked through every version of what came next, and none of them resolved cleanly. Every path had a point where we lost control of what happened to it. We did not reach a decision. What we reached at about 9 in the evening was the point at which the conversation stopped mattering. It was Gary who heard it first. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at the north-facing window. Something was in the tree line. Not one something. The sounds were coming from the north side and the south side both. I had been in this drainage for 11 years in all seasons, and I had never heard it produce sounds like these. Not wind, not any wildlife I could name. Structured, deliberate, the kind of sound that carries information the way speech carries information. With architecture, with intention, with a shape that is not the shape of something venting a feeling but the shape of something being communicated. I went to the north window. The tree line was dark beyond the porch light. The yard was empty. I stood there for 2 minutes and saw nothing. Then Gary said my name, quietly, from the south side of the room. I went to the south window. At the edge of the clearing, right at the border, where the porch light ended and the dark of the trees began, something was standing. Not the one I had shot. I knew that before I finished looking. The proportions were different. This one was taller, broader at the shoulder, carrying its weight differently, 8.5 feet, perhaps more, in the half-light at the tree line's edge. The reddish dark hair catching the yellow of the porch light along the crown, the arms at its sides, the hands open. I want to be specific about the hands. Open, not raised, not bald, not threatening. Hanging open at its sides the way hands hang when there is no aggression in them. It was looking at the cabin. It was looking at the south window. It was looking at me. Gary came and stood beside me. We looked at it together for a long moment. He said, very quietly, "There's another one." I said, "I know." He said, "Does it know what's in the cooler?" I said, "Yes." I knew that with a certainty I cannot fully account for. I knew it the way you know something that has been arriving at you slowly and finally lands all at once. It knew what was in the cooler. It had come because of what was in the cooler, and whatever was making the sounds in the tree line on both sides of the cabin, the structured sounds, the sounds with architecture, they were all here because of what I had done at the creek bank at 1:50 in the morning. Gary said, "We should go out." I did not argue. I have not been arguing with Gary for 30 years, and I was not going to start now. I told him I needed to write this down first, all of it, and he sat down across the table and waited the way he has always waited for me when I needed to finish something. I have been writing for 2 hours. The shape at the tree line has moved. It is in the yard now, in the porch light, 30 feet from the cabin steps. Moving the way it moved up the creek bank that night. Wait and certainty, no hurry. The hands are still open. Every time I look up it is closer, and its expression has not changed. The sounds from the north side have changed register. Lower now, slower, the way a conversation changes when the decision has been made, and what remains is the logistics. Gary has not spoken in 40 minutes. He is sitting across the table doing what we both do in a blind when something is close, completely still, receiving everything, deciding nothing yet. I have the photograph on the table in front of me as I write this. The image is sharp. The detail is sufficient. Anyone who sees this photograph will not be able to say it is inconclusive. This is not a shape at the edge of a frame. This is a Bigfoot face at 10 yards in a camera flash, and it is the clearest documentation of that face that has ever existed, and I know that. and I believe the things in the tree line know that too. I called my brother at 11:17 the night I took the photograph. I told him I had proof. I told him to come in the morning. I told him the address was on the envelope on the table and not to open it until he heard from me. He came. He is here. He has seen the proof. I am going to put this notebook on the table where someone will find it. I do not know what happens after that door opens. I have spent 23 years in these mountains, in the dark, in all weather, alone, and I have always trusted the country to be what it was. I am going to trust it now. Both of us are. Gary is putting on his boots. I have thought about what open hands mean. Not in human terms. I do not think human terms apply here, not fully, but I keep coming back to it. Open hands at the tree line, open hands across the yard, 30 feet from the porch steps, and still open. Whatever it is communicating, it chose that posture and has held it for 2 hours. Something is being offered, or something is being shown, and I am going to walk out that door and find out which one it is. What follows next from now is not written by Dale Pruitt. Gary's wife reported both men missing on Sunday afternoon when neither had returned calls. Authorities located the cabin on Monday morning. The notebook was on the kitchen table, open to this page. The photograph was beside it. One photograph, flashlit, in focus, exactly as described. The cooler was on the floor. It was empty. The back door of the cabin was open. There were no signs of struggle inside. Outside, in the frost-stiff grass of the cabin yard, investigators found 2 sets of boot prints leading from the porch steps toward the south tree line. Both sets reached a point approximately 20 feet from the tree line. Both sets stopped. There were no prints leading back. At the point where the boot prints ended, the ground was disturbed in a way that the initial report described as consistent with a large animal. The deputy who wrote that line later amended it. He could not identify a large animal with a footprint that size. The notebook was taken into evidence. The photograph was taken into evidence. Neither Dale Pruitt nor Gary Pruitt has been found. The case remains open. The lead investigator, in an interview 3 months after the disappearance, said only this: whatever was at that cabin that night, it came for something specific, and it left with more than it came for. He did not elaborate. The cabin has been empty since October. The porch light still runs on its timer, on at dusk, off at 2 in the morning. The road to it is gated now. No one has reported anything unusual in the drainage since the disappearance. The forest is quiet. That might mean something, or it might mean the thing that needed to happen out there has already happened, and the forest has moved on. And whatever Dale and Gary walked toward when they opened that door is not something the forest is going to explain. The photograph is in an evidence locker in a county sheriff's office in eastern Washington. If you know what you're looking at, you know what it shows. If you don't, look again. Ray Dunlap has owned coonhounds his entire adult life. His best dog, a 7-year-old red and tan male named Copper, had never once refused a command, not once in 7 years. And the night Bigfoot came through Vinton County, Copper didn't just disobey Ray Dunlap. Copper ran from something so horrific that he chose a haunted tunnel over the open dark. Moonville Tunnel is a railroad tunnel cut through a sandstone ridge in the mid-1800s, sealed now, surrounded by forest. Ray didn't care about any of that. He'd walked past Moonville Tunnel 100 times on hunting trips and never thought twice about it. That Monday morning, somewhere around 4 a.m., Copper's GPS collar showed the dog moving northeast from the area near Route 56 at a full sprint. Not a tracking pace, a fleeing pace. Ray followed on his phone's map, moving through the tree line with a flashlight, calling the dog's name, getting nothing back. The line ended at the entrance of Moonville Tunnel and went still. Ray found Copper pressed against the back wall of the tunnel, 40 yards in from the entrance, in the absolute dark. The dog was shaking, a full-body shudder, continuous, like something inside the dog was vibrating. Copper's eyes were open and fixed on the tunnel entrance. He would not look at Ray. He would not move toward Ray's voice. Ray had to physically carry him out, all 62 pounds of him, and Copper did not stop shaking for 2 hours. Whatever Copper had encountered, Bigfoot had been close enough to leave a mark. Ray found the footprint at the tunnel's entrance, just outside the threshold where the sandstone floor meets the dirt path. 18 inches long. He measured it against his boot, and then again with a tape measure he carries in his vest, with a width at the ball of the foot that he put at 8 inches. The depth of the impression in the soft ground suggested a weight that Ray, who has spent decades reading animal sign, estimated at somewhere between 600 and 800 pounds. But it wasn't the size that made Him take a photograph and send it to his cousin before he'd even gotten copper back to the truck. It was the toes. The toes were webbed, fully webbed, the way a beaver's hind foot is webbed, with the membrane pressing clear impressions between each digit in the mud. Ray has found bear tracks, deer tracks, wild hog sign, and the occasional river otter trail in his years of hunting Vinton County. He knows what belongs in that soil. He held his flashlight over that print for a long time, and what he told me was this: nothing that lives in Ohio leaves a track that looks like that. Nothing that lives anywhere he knows of is that large and built that way. And then he noticed Copper's flank. He found a burn mark on Copper's left side, circular, about the diameter of a $50, sitting in the fur without any of the surrounding hair being singed. The skin underneath was not broken. There was no blood, no discharge, no sign of infection. Webbed feet on a creature that weighs the better part of half a ton. A thermal burn with surgical precision. A tracking dog that chose a haunted tunnel over the open air. And somewhere on Route 56, the asphalt was still warm. I didn't know it yet, but by the time Tuesday morning arrived, 200 people were going to watch what happened next, live on a college student's phone, and then watch her disappear completely from the internet within 48 hours. The last clip on most people's lists would be the first one I'd show anyone who thinks this subject is a joke. A doorbell camera in suburban Ohio, a residential neighborhood, not a forest, not a trail, not somewhere remote where you'd expect something like this to turn up. A well-lit driveway on an ordinary night, a father coming home, the kind of footage that's so completely unremarkable in its setting that what happens in it takes a full second to register the first time you watch it. He pulls in, gets out of his car, and walks up to his front door with his keys in his hand. Nothing about the first few seconds feels unusual at all. Just a normal night, a normal routine. And then you notice it, standing maybe 6 feet behind him, not moving, not making a sound. Just there in the light, upright, arms at its sides, while he has no idea. He's unlocking his door, focused on getting inside, and the entire time this thing is right behind him, in a lit driveway, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, fully visible to a camera he doesn't even realize is recording. That's the moment the footage is really built around, not the arrival, not the 40 seconds after, but those specific few seconds at the door. He's stationary, focused on a small mechanical task. Keys in the lock, close enough to the frame of the door that the space behind him is open and unobstructed. And it's standing there in that open space at a distance you could cross in 2 steps. The camera holds both of them in the same frame at the same time. A man completely absorbed in something routine and something enormous completely still, just feet behind him. And the contrast between those 2 states is what makes that moment stick. Total unawareness on one side, complete stillness on the other, separated by almost no distance. I've watched this clip over and over, and every time it comes into frame, there's that same moment where it hits you. How does he not know it's there? He goes inside, the door shuts, and it just stays. Not for a second or two, but for almost a full minute, standing there in the open like nothing about this situation is strange. Then eventually, it just turns and walks off. That's the part that doesn't sit right. It doesn't react when the door closes, doesn't move when the light inside turns on, doesn't act startled or rushed in any way. It just stands there for a while, like it's watching or thinking, and then leaves when it decides to. That doesn't feel like something that wandered into the wrong yard or got spooked out of the trees. It feels intentional, like it chose to be there and knew exactly what it was doing, while the person it was watching had no idea any of it was happening. Researchers have described something they call proximity tolerance behavior for years. The idea that these things will sometimes get close to humans, not to attack, not to make contact, but specifically to observe at close range without being detected. I'll be honest, I always treated that particular field note detail with some skepticism, because it sounds like the kind of thing that's easy to claim and impossible to verify. This footage is the verification. Whatever that thing was doing in that driveway, it was doing it with full awareness that the man didn't know it was there, and it maintained that position for 40 seconds after he went inside. That's not a proximity accident. That's a choice. But here's what I think gets overlooked when people focus on the proximity alone: the location. This is Ohio. This is a suburb with neighbors within shouting distance, with porch lights and motion sensors, and the general ambient noise of a residential street at night. This isn't a rural property on the edge of a forest where you might expect the boundary between wilderness and human space to be blurry. This is deep inside human territory, in the kind of neighborhood where the nearest tree line might be a mile away. And something that size, and you can gauge the size against the car, against the doorframe, against the height of the man himself, was standing in that driveway like it had navigated there with a purpose. That implies a range of movement and a comfort with human environments that the conventional framing of this subject has never seriously accounted for. We talk about these things like they belong to the wilderness, like they're creatures of remote forests and mountain corridors. But the Ohio footage doesn't come from a remote forest. It comes from a suburb, and if it's operating that comfortably in a lit residential driveway, then the question of where exactly its territory ends and where ours begins becomes a much harder question to answer than most people are prepared for. What I keep returning to is the question of what it was actually doing there. Because the Ohio footage doesn't give you an answer, it gives you a behavior and leaves the reason for it completely open. It wasn't eating. It wasn't building anything. It wasn't responding to a stimulus that we can identify from the footage. It was watching a man come home, and then it stood in his driveway for 40 seconds after he went inside, and then it left. And if that's what it looks like when this thing is just observing, then the question that follows is an uncomfortable one. How often is this happening in places without cameras? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, and I think that's exactly the point. The second clip comes from rural West Virginia, and where the Ohio footage is unsettling because of how close it gets, this one is unsettling for a completely different reason, because of how deliberate and structured the behavior is. Home security camera, color footage, captured in the afternoon with clear lighting and a clean angle on the edge of the property. The property belongs to someone who had been doing what some researchers call habituation work, leaving objects and small amounts of food at a consistent location on the property line over a period of weeks, trying to establish a recognizable pattern of exchange. I've always been a little skeptical of that methodology, if I'm being honest. It sounds rigorous when you describe it in field notes, but in practice it can easily become someone leaving snacks in the woods and reading meaning into the fact that they disappear. Animals take food. That's not evidence of anything, but this footage isn't about food disappearing. This footage shows the response. The camera catches it walking to the edge of the property in the afternoon. It moves without any urgency, fully upright, and it goes directly to the spot where the researcher had placed a small object as part of the exchange. Not food, just an object, something deliberately chosen and positioned. The directness of that approach is worth pausing on because it doesn't match how an animal moves towards something unfamiliar. Animals hesitate, they circle, pause, check from a distance, approach and retreat before committing. None of that is present here. It walks straight to the location the way you walk to something you already know is there. There's no hesitation at the edge of the property, no pause before closing the final distance. The movement suggests prior awareness, not discovery, but execution of something already decided before it entered the frame. It stops at that spot, reaches down, and picks the object up. And then it does something I have genuinely never seen documented clearly on camera before. It examines it, not a quick grab and toss, not a sniff and drop. It holds the object, turns it, looks at it the way you'd look at something you were actually curious about, something you were trying to understand. Then it places it back down, exactly where it found it. And before it leaves, it arranges a small pile of stones in the same spot where the object had been sitting. A deliberate, arranged pile of stones, left in exchange for an object that was examined and returned. I don't know what to do with that. I've sat with this clip for a long time, and I still don't have a clean way to process it, because what it shows isn't instinct, and it isn't territorial behavior, and it isn't a stress response. What it shows is something that understood the implicit structure of what was being offered. Here is an object, here is a location, here is a repeated pattern, and responded to it within that same structure. It engaged with the exchange on its own terms. It left something behind, in the same spot, on purpose. But the detail I keep coming back to isn't the stones themselves, it's the fact that it returned the object first. It picked it up, examined it, and put it back exactly where it found it before leaving the stones. That's a sequence of decisions. It didn't take the object. It didn't discard it. It chose to return it to its original position and then add something of its own alongside it. That tells you something specific about how it understood the interaction, not as a transaction where one thing gets replaced by another, but as something more like a conversation. Here is what you left. I looked at it. Here is what I'm adding. The object stays because the object was yours. The stones are mine. That's not a territorial response. That's not instinct. That's an understanding of ownership and exchange that I find genuinely difficult to categorize using any conventional framework for animal behavior. Researchers have been documenting this exchange behavior for years across multiple regions, and it's one of those things that consistently gets dismissed because it sounds too convenient, too anthropomorphic, too much like something you'd invent to make the subject seem more compelling than it is. But watching it happen in real time, in color, in the afternoon, on a home security camera that wasn't even set up specifically to capture this, it stops being a field note detail and becomes something you have to actually reckon with. Something out there understood what was being offered and chose to respond to it. And whatever it communicated with that pile of arranged stones, it communicated it intentionally. The third clip is the one that, from a pure documentation standpoint, might be the most significant of the five. Not because of what it looks like, though the image quality is genuinely exceptional, but because of what you can hear before you ever see anything. And while putting this together, we ended up going deeper than just these clips. There are other cases, same patterns, different places, details that start to line up. We compiled everything in one place, so if you want to look into it further, the link is in the description. Dash cam footage from a forest road in northern Minnesota. Dense tree cover on both sides, maybe 20 feet of visibility before the tree line closes in completely. Daytime, clear conditions, nothing unusual about the first few seconds of the clip. The driver is moving at a normal speed and the road ahead is empty. And then the audio catches something that stops the whole clip in its tracks before the visual event even happens. Wood knocking, sharp, deliberate strikes, not a branch falling, not a random impact, not the kind of ambient forest sound that gets misidentified on recordings. 2 strikes, a pause, then 2 more. The rhythm is intentional in a way that's immediately apparent even if you've never heard a field recording of this behavior before. Researchers have been documenting wood knocking for decades and describing it as a signaling behavior used between individuals across distance, a way of communicating location or status through deliberate percussion against tree trunks. I've heard field recordings of it, but hearing it captured incidentally on dashcam audio by someone who was just driving down a road is a different experience entirely. It sounds exactly like what it's always been described as: structured, deliberate, like something is sending a message to something else. And then, 20 feet ahead of the vehicle, it steps out of the tree line. Full body, daylight, unhurried. It crosses the road at a pace that isn't rushed, not fleeing, not startled, not reacting to the vehicle the way an animal that had been surprised would react. It moves across the frame with a stride length and an arm swing that doesn't hold up to any conventional explanation, and at some point during that crossing, it turns and looks directly into the windshield. Not a glance, a sustained look. It holds that for a moment, and then it continues walking and disappears into the tree line on the other side of the road. The arm swing is one of the details analysts consistently focus on in bipedal footage because it's difficult to fake and difficult to misinterpret. Human arm motion follows a predictable pattern tied to shoulder width, stride, and balance. What shows up here doesn't match that pattern. The swing is longer, lower, and counter-rotates against the torso in a way that suggests a different structural alignment, particularly in the shoulders and upper body mass distribution. You can question lighting, distance, even scale, but sustained movement like this, in clear daylight and across multiple steps, gives you something far more stable to evaluate. The whole crossing lasts maybe 8 seconds, but there's more going on in those 8 seconds than in most footage I've seen in years. You've got the audio first, the wood knocking, clear and deliberate, happening before anything steps into view, which means whatever made that sound was already there and already signaling before it ever came out onto the road. Then you have the movement, the gait, the posture, the arm swing. None of it lines up cleanly with a human. And then there's that look. It turns toward the windshield and holds it, not like an animal reacting to a car, but like something that recognized it was being observed and chose to acknowledge it. That sequence is what makes this clip stand out. Signal, then appearance, then eye contact. That's not a random crossing. It feels structured, and the fact that the wood knocking happens just seconds before it steps out makes it much harder to write off, because it suggests the crossing wasn't accidental. Something was happening right before it appeared, and whatever that was, the timing lines up too closely to ignore. The fourth clip is the one that hits differently depending on what you already know about how these encounters tend to unfold, and it's the one I think most people underestimate when they first watch it. A hiker's phone, Appalachian Trail, Tennessee. The footage starts the way a lot of trail videos do. Someone walking, filming the path ahead, nothing remarkable about the surroundings. And then the hiker stops. He doesn't stop because he sees something. He doesn't stop because he hears something. He stops because something feels wrong. And that distinction is the most important thing about this entire clip. One of the most consistently reported elements in close proximity encounters, reported independently, across decades, across geography, by people who have never read each other's accounts, is a specific physical sensation that precedes the visual sighting. Not a sound, not a movement, not anything the witness can point to as a concrete trigger. Just a sudden, sourceless dread. An overwhelming sense that something is not right, that the environment has shifted in some way that the conscious mind can't identify, but the body is already responding to. Witnesses describe it as feeling wrong rather than seeing or hearing something wrong. And the consistency of that description across completely unrelated accounts is one of the things that makes it worth taking seriously. Researchers have connected this to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz, below the threshold of human hearing that the body registers physically, rather than audibly. Large predators produce it. The documented effects on humans include unease, disorientation, nausea, and a sense of dread that feels irrational because there's no conscious auditory source to attach it to. You feel it before you understand why you feel it, and by the time you understand why, the source is already close. That's the part that unsettles me most about this particular behavior, the idea that an encounter can begin affecting you before you're even aware one is happening. Your body is already in a threat response before your brain has registered a threat. And I think about what that actually means experientially, not just clinically. You're on a trail. Nothing has changed visually. The trees look the same, the light looks the same, the path ahead is clear. And then something shifts in you that you can't name. A weight in your chest that wasn't there a second ago. A sudden, irrational certainty that you need to stop moving. Your instincts are screaming at you and you don't know why. And the reason you don't know why is that the thing causing it is operating below the frequency your ears can process. You are being affected by something you are physically incapable of hearing. And by the time that feeling is strong enough to make you stop, it's already close enough to be doing that to you. That's not a warning system that gives you time to react. That's a warning system that tells you it's already too late to put distance between you and whatever is out there. The footage supports that in a way you can actually observe. When the hiker stops, there's no visible or audible trigger in the recording. Nothing in the frame that explains the reaction. He stops because of something the camera cannot capture. A few seconds later, when he finally locates it, the camera movement reveals something important. His head turns first, and the phone follows slightly behind. That delay means his eyes found the source before he consciously adjusted the camera. It isn't a slow scan landing on a target. It's attention being pulled to a specific point, and then the device catching up to that realization. Whatever caused the initial reaction didn't just make him stop. It aligned his attention with a location before he deliberately chose to look. That's exactly what happens in this clip. The hiker stops. You can see in the way he moves, in how he holds the phone, that he's unsettled, in a way he can't explain. He looks around. He scans the trees. And then he looks up, across a gap in the tree cover, and he sees it, standing 60 feet away, already watching him. It's not moving toward him, not reacting to being spotted, not doing anything that suggests it was surprised by the eye contact. It's just standing there, in the open, watching, the way something watches when it's been watching for a while and has no particular reason to stop. The timeline is the thing that matters here. The hiker stopped because of the feeling. The feeling came before the sighting, which means whatever produced that infrasound sensation was already close enough to affect him physically before he ever turned to look. It was already there, already operating, and he had no idea until his own body told him something was wrong. And even then, it took him another several seconds to find it visually. By the time he saw it, it had already been present long enough to affect him at a physiological level. That's a sequence, not a coincidence. And that sequence matches the field accounts with a precision that's very hard to explain away. The fifth clip is the one I want to spend the most time on, because I think it's the most misunderstood of the five and also, in some ways, the most consequential in terms of what it actually tells us. Pacific Northwest, a creek bed, trail camera footage captured in full daylight with a clear image and a good angle on the area being monitored. The camera had been positioned at a property boundary, the kind of placement researchers use when they're tracking activity in a specific corridor over time. And what it caught wasn't a sighting in the traditional sense. There's no dramatic moment of emergence, no crossing, no eye contact with the lens. What it caught was something already in the middle of doing something, and the something it was doing is the reason this clip matters as much as it does. It's building a structure. Two young saplings, flexible enough to be bent without breaking, being worked into a deliberate X formation right at the property boundary line. And the footage shows the process, not just the finished result, but the actual construction. You can watch it select the saplings, bend the first one, hold it in position, bring the second one across, and lock them together. And then it stops. There's no visible adjustment phase, no testing of the structure, no inspection the way you would expect if the result were uncertain. It straightens, takes a small step back, and orients toward the tree line. The finished structure holds its attention only briefly before it leaves the frame. That sequence suggests the outcome was already defined before the process began. The construction isn't exploratory. It follows through to a known result, and once that result is achieved, there's nothing further to evaluate. The finished structure is clean and intentional, and it's placed exactly at the line where the monitored property ends and the forest begins. Not 20 feet into the woods, not in a clearing somewhere. At the boundary, at the line. Tree structures, X formations, arches, leaners, deliberate arrangements of bent or broken saplings have been documented across North America for decades by researchers working in completely separate regions who arrived at consistent conclusions about what they represent. X formations appear at boundaries, at the edges of human-occupied land, at the margins between spaces. Arches appear at entry points and along travel corridors. The placements aren't random, and they aren't the result of wind or animal movement or coincidental growth patterns. They're placed, and they're placed in ways that suggest an understanding of spatial boundaries, of where one kind of territory ends and another begins. I've seen photographs of these structures. I've read the field documentation. But watching one being built, watching the deliberate, sequential process of selecting the material, bending it, locking it, placing it at a specific location, changes the nature of the evidence in a way that photographs of finished structures simply cannot. A photograph of a bent sapling can always be explained away. Footage of the construction process doesn't have that exit. You're watching a decision being made and executed. You're watching something choose a location, choose the material, and produce a finished structure that matches a pattern documented across thousands of miles of geography by researchers who have never been in contact with each other. What that implies about territory and spatial awareness is something I find genuinely difficult to sit with, because it means whatever built that structure understood that a boundary existed at that specific location. It understood the concept of a line between spaces, and it chose to mark that line in a way that's consistent with how these markers have been documented continent-wide for decades. That's not animal behavior in any framework I know how to apply. Animals mark territory, but they don't build structures at the edges of human property lines that mirror a documented pattern across an entire continent. That's something operating with a level of spatial and communicative awareness that doesn't fit any conventional category. And that's the point where most people would stop. You've seen enough to recognize that something is happening, and it's easy to leave it there. But the footage doesn't let you do that. Because once you've seen more than one of these, they stop feeling separate. The details carry over, the way it moves, the way it positions itself, the timing of when it acts and when it doesn't. Those patterns don't reset, they persist, and that changes what you're actually looking at. April 2026 didn't just produce clearer footage, it captured behavior that holds up no matter where you look at it from. This is the clearest Bigfoot footage ever captured in a single month, not because of how it looks, but because of what it's doing. Kira Vasquez was the kind of person who documented everything. Her followers knew her morning coffee, her class schedule, her opinions on the hiking trails around Ohio University's Athens campus. She'd done the Stroud's Run Trail on camera twice before. It was a Tuesday, she had a gap between classes. The fall color was still holding in the tree line, and she went live with 212 viewers watching from the start. For the first 9 minutes, the video is exactly what it looks like. A college student walking a well-maintained trail. At the 9-minute and 40-second mark, Kira stops walking. The camera, which she's been holding loosely at chest height, stops moving with her. There's a pause of about 4 seconds where she says nothing. Then, in a voice that is notably quieter than anything she'd said in the preceding 9 minutes, she says, "It's not a bear." Then she runs. The footage during the run is shaky and difficult to parse. But at the 6-second mark of the run, the camera swings left for just over 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, in the gap between two mature oak trees at the edge of the trail, Bigfoot is visible. I've paused on that frame more times than I can count. The two oaks are approximately 14 inches apart at the gap where the shape appears. 14 inches, which I confirmed by visiting the trail myself and measuring the scar the roots leave on the trail's edge. 14 inches is not a passage. It's a gap you turn sideways to squeeze through if you're a slender adult. What moves through it in Kira's footage is not slender. The Sasquatch that crosses between those trees is massive and dark, with a width across the shoulders that the frame, even in its shaky motion, cannot contain. Bigfoot did not push the trees apart. That's the part that the online analysis kept returning to, and it's the part that I can't explain away, no matter how I try. Both oaks are visible in the frame before and after the shape passes. Neither one moves, and neither trunk deflects. I reached out to Kira through a mutual contact at Ohio University. I'm not going to share the details of that conversation out of respect for where she is now, but I will tell you what she confirmed. She saw Bigfoot from a distance of roughly 40 feet before she started running. She described it as standing completely still between the trees, facing her direction. She said the stillness was the worst part. Not movement, not aggression, just absolute stillness. She withdrew from Ohio University 11 days after the sighting, but Tuesday wasn't finished with Ohio yet, because that same night, 12 miles west in Hocking Hills, a family was lying in a tent listening to something circle them in the dark, and their weather radio was about to say something that none of them have been able to unhear. My name is Ray. I am 54 years old. I have farmed the same 212 acres in rural eastern Oregon for 26 years, the same land my father farmed before me and his father before him. It was late September. The nights had turned cold and clear, the kind of high desert autumn that makes the stars look closer than they should. I went out at 5 in the morning to check the chickens the way I do every morning, and I found the coop broken into. Not by a coyote. I know coyote damage. I have been fighting coyotes on this land for 26 years, and I know the signature: the dug under, the torn wire, the scattered feathers, the small bones. This was not that. The wire on the east side of the coop had been pulled away from the frame. Not cut, not chewed. Pulled. The staples drawn cleanly out of the wood as if they had been extracted one by one with a tool. The frame itself was intact. 4 birds were gone. The remaining birds were alive but pressed into the far corner in a silence I had never heard from chickens before. Not the noise of disturbed birds. The silence of birds that have decided that making any sound at all is a mistake. I stood in that coop for a long time, looking at the pulled staples. I have a neighbor, Walt, who runs sheep on the parcel to the north of mine. I called him that morning. He had lost 2 lambs the week before. He had chalked it up to cougar, which is not unreasonable in this country. I asked him to describe the kill site. He described something that did not match the cougar. No drag marks, no cached carcass, no bite pattern. The lambs were simply gone, as if they had been picked up and carried. I did not say what I was thinking. Walt is a practical man, and I am a practical man, and neither of us was going to say the word Bigfoot out loud. Not then, not to each other. That word belongs to a category of things that practical men in this part of Oregon do not say in serious conversation, and we were both working very hard to stay in serious conversation. I reinforced the co-op that afternoon. New wire, heavier gauge, doubled up on the staples. I ran a hot wire along the bottom of the frame. I put a padlock on the door. 3 nights later, 4 more birds were gone. The hot wire had been triggered. I could see where something had contacted it, the burn mark on the grass below the frame. Whatever it was had taken the shock, processed it, and continued. The heavy gauge wire was still in place, but the boards on the north side of the coop had been separated at the joint, the nails backing out of the wood with the same deliberate precision as the staples before them. A gap 6 inches wide, top to bottom. 6 inches is not enough for a coyote. It is not enough for a bear. It is barely enough for a determined raccoon, and a raccoon does not pull nails. I set up a camera. I set it on the post at the northeast corner of the coop yard, angled to cover the north wall. I ran a second one on the barn roof, covering the approach from the tree line. I checked them the next morning. The post camera was on the ground. Not fallen, the mount had been disassembled. The wing nut backed off the bolt, and the camera lifted free. It was sitting in the grass 6 feet from the post, face up, the way you set something down when you want to put it somewhere safe. The memory card was still in it. The last frame on the card was a wall of darkness with something at the right edge that I have looked at many times since. A shape, the lower portion of something. A leg, perhaps, or a forearm. Something large. The barn roof camera was still in place. It had captured nothing. Its field of view ended at the fence line, and whatever had been at the coop had approached from a different angle than I had anticipated. Something was taking my animals. It was large. The force required to extract staples and back out nails spoke to significant size and hand strength. It was intelligent. The camera removal, the approach angle that avoided my second camera, the hot wire shock absorbed and adapted to. It was returning on a 3-day cycle, which meant it had a range and a pattern, and I was a predictable stop on it. I decided to build a trap. I want to be specific about this because people have asked me since if I knew what I was trapping. The honest answer is, I suspected. The word Bigfoot had been sitting at the back of my mind like a splinter I was not ready to dig out. I had grown up in this country, and I had heard the stories my whole life, at the feed store, at the diner, from the older ranchers who had been on their land long enough to have things happen that they did not talk about in mixed company. I had always filed those stories in the same place I filed most things I could not verify, not dismissed, not accepted, just held. Now I was standing in my coop, looking at pulled staples and doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic kept arriving at the same answer. But what I told myself I was building was a large animal trap, something that would hold whatever was taking my birds long enough for me to get a look at it and make a decision about what to do next. That is what I told myself. I built it from livestock panels, the heavy welded wire panels I use for cattle working pens. 8 panels, each 16 feet long and 52 inches tall, wired together at the corners with doubled fence wire. A frame of 4-inch steel posts driven 3 feet into the ground at each corner and at the midpoint of each long side. I roofed it with 2 additional panels laid flat and secured with wire at every junction. The door was a sliding panel of the same material, counterweighted with a bag of concrete, so it would drop fast when the trigger released. The trigger was a pressure plate, a section of 1/2-inch plywood mounted on a spring mechanism over a shallow pit at the center of the enclosure. 30 pounds of pressure would release the door. I put the trigger under a pile of fresh straw with 4 chickens inside the enclosure, living birds that would make noise and draw something in. I built this in a day and a half. My wife, Carol, watched me build it and did not ask what I was trapping. She knows me well enough to know that when I am building something with that much steel, the conversation about why can wait until the thing is done. She brought me coffee in the afternoon and stood at the edge of the yard looking at the structure. She said, "That's a serious cage." I said, "It's a serious problem." She went back inside. I ran the game camera on the barn roof again, repositioned to cover the cage. I went to bed at 10. I set an alarm for 1 in the morning. I did not sleep much. At 1, I got up, dressed, and went out to the porch. Cold, mid-30s, clear, the moon 3/4 full, and throwing hard shadows across the yard. The cage was 40 feet from the porch. I could see it clearly. The chickens inside had quieted. I stood on the porch for an hour. Nothing came. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with the light off and the window open until 3:15. Then I went back to bed. The alarm went off at 4:30. I was out the door by 4:32. The cage door was down. I stopped walking when I saw it, stood in the yard with the flashlight in my hand and the beam on the cage, and I did not move for what was probably 30 seconds. The door was down. The chickens were visible through the wire, alive, clustered at the far end of the enclosure, and in the center of the cage, standing with its back to me, was something I had no category for. It was facing away. That was the first thing. Facing away from me toward the tree line, as if it had been looking at the trees when the door came down and had not yet turned around. It was standing, fully upright, no crouch, just standing, occupying the space the way a person occupies a room. The top of it was above the roof line of the cage, the panels bowing slightly upward under pressure, even though the roof wire was secured at every junction. It was taller than my cage. My cage was 52 inches, 4'4". What was inside it was taller than that. The roof wire was bowing upward under the pressure of its head and shoulders. I will tell you what I felt in that moment because it is relevant to what I did next. I felt the specific satisfaction of a problem solved. For about 4 seconds, a trap I built from livestock panels and a concrete counterweight had done what I built it to do, and the part of my brain that solves problems registered the completion of the task before the other parts of my brain caught. Then it turned around. I have spent a lot of time since trying to find the right language for that moment, and I am not sure the right language exists. It turned around in the cage the way you turn around in a small room, carefully because the space was barely adequate, shifting its weight with a precision that told me it knew exactly where its body was in the space at all times. And when it was facing me, it looked at me. I have made eye contact with a lot of animals in 26 years of farming. Cattle, horses, dogs, coyotes, the occasional deer at the fence line in the morning. I know animal eye contact. I know what it looks like when something is registering you as a stimulus. This was not that. What looked at me through the wire of my livestock panels was making an assessment, a structured, patient, detailed assessment of the situation, the cage, the door, me, the distance between me and it, the flashlight, the yard, the house behind me. Its eyes moved, not the rapid scan of prey or the fixed lock of predator. A methodical inventory, the way you look at a room when you're trying to understand all of it at once. It knew it was caught, and it was deciding what to do about it. I backed up 3 steps without making a decision to back up. My boots found the ground, and I moved backward, and I did not take my flashlight off its face. The face. I am going to describe this plainly, because plainly is the only way I know how to talk, and dressing it up would not make it more true. The face was not human, but the proportions of it, the spacing of the eyes, the presence of a brow, the architecture of the jaw, were in the neighborhood of humans in a way that no animal I have encountered has been. It had hair across the forehead, reddish dark, the same material as the rest of it. The eyes were set forward like a predator's. The nose was broader than a human nose. The jaw was substantial in a way that suggested significant bite force. But the eyes were what stopped me from backing up further. Not because they were frightening, because they were considering me the same way I was considering them, with the same quality of organized attention, the same inventory. I had caught something that was thinking about being caught. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, and I am not too proud to tell you that my hands were not steady when I put the flashlight down. Carol came downstairs at 5. She looked at my face, and then out the kitchen window at the cage, and then at my face again. She said, "What is it?" I said, "I don't know exactly." She said, "Is it hurt?" That question had not occurred to me yet. I said, "I don't think so. I don't know." She went to the window. From the kitchen you could see the shape of it through the wire in the early light, the size of it, the way it was standing. Carol has lived on this land for 23 years. She is not a woman who frightens easily, and she is not a woman who pretends things are not what they are. She said, "Ray, that's not an animal." I said, "I know." She said, "Is it a Bigfoot?" I had not said the word out loud yet, not once since this started. I had held it at the back of my mind for 2 weeks and built a cage around the suspicion without ever naming it directly. And now my wife was saying it plainly, the way she said everything. I said, "I think so." She was quiet. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I did not have an answer. I had built the trap to solve a problem, and I had solved it. And now I had a different problem that was significantly larger than the first one, and I had no framework for it at all. I had a list forming in my head of people I could call: the county sheriff, the state wildlife agency, the university extension office, and I was working through that list and finding that none of those calls made sense. What do you say? I have a Bigfoot in a livestock panel cage in my yard, and I need someone to come and collect it? The sheriff would send a deputy who would call his supervisor, who would call someone else, and by the end of the chain, there would be federal agencies and university researchers and wildlife photographers, and every single one of them would be making decisions about something in my yard that I had built and caught and was responsible for. There is no protocol for a captured Bigfoot. I have looked since. There is genuinely no protocol. I went back outside at 6. It had sat down, not collapsed, not cowering. Sat down the way you sit when you have been standing for a while and have decided that standing is no longer the most efficient use of your energy. Cross-legged on the ground, which meant it understood the geometry of the space well enough to know that sitting was viable, where standing was a strain. The chickens had moved to within a few feet of it, which told me something about its smell or its energy, or something I do not have a word for. Prey animals do not voluntarily approach predators. Those chickens had made a calculation. I walked to within 10 feet of the cage. It looked at me, the same quality of attention as before, organized, patient, not aggressive. It glanced at the cage door, at the counterweight, at the mechanism I had used to trigger the drop. Its gaze moved across the components with the systematic thoroughness of something that was reverse engineering what had happened to it. That is when I understood that the cage was not going to hold. Not because the steel was inadequate. 4-inch posts driven 3 feet into rocky eastern Oregon soil are not going anywhere. Not because the wire was too light. A 16-gauge livestock panel is rated for cattle, and it held. The cage would hold, but whatever was in it had already figured out how the door worked. I could see it in the way its attention had moved across the mechanism. Give it time and privacy, and it would solve the door. Maybe not today, maybe not by brute force, though I did not discount brute force given the evidence of what it had done to my coop, but it would solve it. I had maybe a day. I went back inside and I told Carol what I was thinking. She said, "Then you need to decide before the day is up." She was right. I had 3 options. Call someone, and if so, who and what happens after. Release it, open the door, and step back, or keep it and figure out next steps from there. The call option kept failing because I could not identify a single institution I trusted to handle this decently. I have dealt with government agencies my entire farming life. I know how institutions handle things they have no category for, badly, and in ways that benefit the institution more than the thing. Whatever was in that cage was not a specimen. I watched it think. I was not going to hand it to people who would treat it like one. The keep it option failed because I had already watched it study my cage door, and I did not have enough livestock panels to build something it couldn't eventually solve. That left the release option. I did not act on the release option immediately. I want to be honest about why. I was not ready. I had built a trap for a reason, and the reason had not resolved itself, and releasing it felt like admitting the reason was wrong. So instead, I went back out to the cage at 9 in the morning, and I stood 10 feet from it, and I watched. It had moved since 6. It was no longer sitting cross-legged. It had shifted to the east side of the enclosure and was standing, one hand on the wire, its weight distributed the way weight distributes when you have been standing for a while, and your body is managing the fatigue without complaint. It was looking northeast, not at me, not at the house, northeast. The direction of the tree line beyond my property boundary, the direction it had come from. I had the distinct impression that it was tracking something, not visually. Nothing was visible from where it stood. Something else, sound maybe, or something I do not have a word for because I do not have the equipment to perceive it. I went inside and got my notebook. I came back out and I sat in the folding chair I use for morning chores, and I started writing down what I was observing the way I write down everything I observe on this property that I do not have an immediate explanation for. It is a habit from 26 years of farming. If you cannot explain it yet, record it. Something I wrote down that morning, 9:15, right hand on wire at shoulder height, fingers curled around the gauge in a grip that is not testing the wire, is just resting there, left arm at its side, eyes oriented northeast, breathing slow, deliberate, deeper rhythm than what I would expect from something at rest, not distress, not a panting or a starved breath. The breath of something that is using its respiratory system for something other than simple oxygenation. Listening, maybe, receiving. At 9:40, it turned its head and looked at me, not with surprise. It knew I was there. It had known I was there from the moment I sat down. The turn of the head was not a response to my presence. It was something else. An acknowledgement, maybe, a check. The way you look at someone in the room when you want to confirm they are still there before you go back to whatever you were attending to. It looked at me for about 8 seconds. Then it looked northeast again. I wrote that down too. I want to tell you what it is like to sit 10 feet from a caged Bigfoot for 3 hours on a September morning, because people have asked me since, and I have not known how to answer. The honest answer is that it was the most concentrated observation I have ever done in 26 years of farming, which is a life spent in close daily attention to living things. I have watched cattle and horses and dogs and working animals of every kind. I know what animals look like across the range of their states: contentment, fear, hunger, illness, the particular unease of an animal that senses weather changing. I have a large catalog, and I know how to read it. What was in that cage did not fit the catalog, not because it was alien, because it was too close. The attention it directed at its environment was organized in a way that kept making me feel I was observing something that was also observing me. Not defensively, not aggressively, but with the same quality of systematic interest that I was bringing to it. I kept catching myself adjusting my posture, the way you adjust your posture when you become aware that someone is watching you work. It was not watching me work. It was doing what it was doing, but the quality of its ambient awareness kept producing that response in me. At 10, I wrote, "This is not like watching an animal. This is like sitting in a room with someone." I crossed that out and wrote it again and left it. The morning went on. Carol brought me coffee at 10 and stood behind the chair for a minute, looking at the cage. She did not say anything. She went back inside. At 10:30, the thing in the cage sat back down, cross-legged again, and closed its eyes. Not sleep. The rhythm of the breathing changed, but remained deliberate, and the posture did not have the slackness of sleep. Something more like what I have seen horses do when they are conserving energy but remaining alert. A very particular kind of rest. I sat with it for another hour. What I kept coming back to, sitting in that folding chair in the September morning, was the chicken. A single bird had climbed into the thing's lap at some point between 6 and 9. It was still there when I came out at 9. A Rhode Island red hen, one of the older ones, sitting in its lap the way a hen sits when it has found a satisfactory perch and sees no reason to move. The thing had not moved it, was not touching it, just sitting with a chicken in its lap, the chicken apparently unbothered, and the two of them oriented in the same direction. I do not know what to do with that image. I have thought about it a great deal. Prey animals do not voluntarily approach predators. That hen had made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion and acted on the conclusion, and the calculation had not produced any outcome the hen appeared to regret. I have run chickens on this land for 26 years, and I have a sense for how they rid situations. What that hen had read in the thing in the cage was not a predator, which meant I did not know what it was, which meant the word Bigfoot, which I had been holding at arm's length for 2 weeks, was not the end of the understanding. It was just the beginning of it. At noon, I went inside and ate lunch and made a decision. I was going to release it. I was going to walk out to the cage with the bolt cutters, cut the counterweight wire, and open the door and step back and let it go. I had spent 6 hours watching something that was not what I had thought I was trapping, and I was not willing to keep it through a second night. I told Carol. She nodded and said, "Do you want me there?" I said no. She said, "I'll be at the window." I went out with the bolt cutters at 12:30. It was standing when I came out, not the way it had been standing at 9, with one hand on the wire and the attention oriented away. It was facing the door when I came through the back gate, fully upright, both arms at its sides, watching me cross the yard with the bolt cutters in my hand. It knew what the bolt cutters were for. I want to be careful about that claim because I have made a lot of claims in this account, and I want to hold the line between what I observed and what I inferred. What I observed was that it watched my approach to the counterweight mechanism with the same quality of attention it had given to the cage architecture that morning, organized, tracking, following the logic of what was happening, and that when I positioned the bolt cutters on the wire and looked up at it, its weight shifted forward, not lunging, not rushing the door. The slight lean of something that has been waiting for a particular moment and has just recognized its arrival. I cut the wire. The counterweight dropped. The door went up. I stepped back to the far edge of the yard and I watched. It did not move immediately. It stood at the open door for what felt like a long time, 30 seconds, perhaps 40, looking at the opening, looking at me across the yard, looking at the tree line beyond the fence. I have spent time thinking about what those 30 or 40 seconds contained. The most practical version is simple: a cautious animal assessing whether the open door was a new kind of trap before committing to it. The version I keep returning to, the one I cannot dismiss, is that something more like a decision was being made, not about whether to leave, that was already decided, about something else, something I was part of. It took 3 steps toward me. I want to say clearly that I did not run, not because I was brave, because the fear response was slower than the situation. By the time my body understood it should be afraid, it was already over. 3 steps, which put it approximately 6 feet from where I was standing, and then it stopped. 6 feet. I could see the individual hairs at its brow line. I could see the specific color differentiation in the fur where the chest darkened relative to the arms. I could see the size of its hands in a way the cage wire had not allowed, the full unobstructed fact of them, the length of the fingers relative to the palm, the thickness of the joints. These were the hands that had pulled my staples. They were twice the size of mine. It looked at me for what I estimated was 15 seconds. A specific, organized attention, the same inventory it had run through the cage wire that morning, applied now to my face at 6 feet. I did not move. I did not speak. I breathed as steadily as I could manage, and I held the bolt cutters at my side, and I looked back. Then it turned, walked to the fence at the northeast corner of the property, stepped over the top wire the way I would step over a low curb, and went north, straight north, toward the pasture, toward the cattle pen 200 yards up the slope. I did not understand the direction immediately. I thought it was simply the most direct route to the tree line, and I stood at the edge of my yard and watched it go, and I thought, it is done. The problem is resolved. I made the right call. Then I heard the cattle. The cattle pen is 200 yards north of the main yard, past the barn, at the edge of the property where the pasture meets the tree line. I run 23 head on that pasture in the fall. I have run cattle on this land for 26 years. I know every sound they make in every condition, in heat, in cold, in the presence of a coyote at the perimeter, in the hours before a weather change. I know the sound of a herd that has been startled, and the sound of a herd that has been hurt, and the sound of a herd that has simply smelled something it does not recognize. What I heard coming from the north pasture as I went through the back gate was none of those things. I was running by the time I came around the barn. The fence was down on the east side of the pen. 2 rails snapped clean at the midpoint, the posts they had been nailed to pulled from the ground and lying in the pasture grass, still attached to the nails. Something had gone through the fence rather than over it, not a gap, through, in the way that something goes through a thing when the thing is simply not a relevant obstacle. The herd was bunched at the far west corner, pressed together in the way prey animals press when they have identified a threat and run out of options. All 20 of them accounted for, all of them alive. All of them were as still as I have ever seen 20 cattle be at once, which is a kind of stillness I did not know cattle were capable of producing. 3 of the younger steers were not in the corner. I will tell you what I found in the order I found it, and I will tell you plainly, and I will not describe it in more detail than the account requires. The first steer was at the edge of the pasture near the irrigation ditch. It had not been dragged there. It had not been fed upon. What had been done to it had been done quickly, and had been done by something operating at a level of force I have no comparison for in 26 years of ranching. The second steer was 20 yards further north, the same. The third I found at the north fence line, against the wire. I stood in that pasture for a long time. I had released it. That is the thing I kept coming back to, standing there in the September morning with the sun fully up and the shadow of the barn cutting across the pasture grass behind me. I had released it. I had made the decision I thought was the right one. I had walked out with the bolt cutters and cut the counterweight wire and opened the door and stepped back and watched it walk north. And the direction it walked had told me nothing. And I had stood at the edge of my yard and thought, the problem is resolved. 3 steers at the north fence line told me something different about what the problem had actually been. I understand now what 11 hours in a cage 4 feet 4 inches tall does to something that has spent its whole life moving through open country. I had watched the intelligence across those 11 hours. The inventory, the assessment, the patience, the chicken sitting unbothered in its lap. I had watched all of it, and I had made a calculation about what it was. I had not made an adequate calculation about what 11 hours of confinement was doing to what it was underneath the intelligence. I stood in my north pasture, and I looked at the tree line where it had gone, and I thought about the 15 seconds of eye contact at 6 feet before it turned, about the specific quality of that attention, about what it had been deciding in those 15 seconds that I had not understood it was deciding. I think it had already decided about the cattle before it looked at me. I think the 15 seconds were something else. I have farmed this land for 26 years, and I have dealt with losses before, to weather, to disease, to coyotes, and the occasional cougar. Losses are part of this work. You account for them, and you absorb them, and you keep going because stopping is not a viable option on a working farm. I absorbed this one. I kept going. I stood in that pasture with the September morning clear and cold around me, and the tree line quiet to the north, and I understood, in a way that I had not understood before that morning, the size of what I had been dealing with. I had built a trap to solve a problem. What I had not understood until I was standing in my north pasture, looking at the tree line, was the size of the problem I was actually dealing with. The Callahan family, Dennis, his wife Sandra, and their 2 teenage sons, had been camping at Hocking Hills for 3 days by the time Tuesday night arrived. They were experienced campers. Dennis told me they'd done that campsite 4 times in the past 6 years. So when something started circling the tent at 11:43 p.m., Dennis Callahan knew immediately that it did not belong. It wasn't footsteps. That was the first thing he said to me, and he repeated it twice, the way people repeat details they know sound wrong, but need you to understand are accurate. It wasn't footsteps. It was a rhythmic, hollow percussion, a heavy thump followed by a half-second silence, then another thump, coming from ground level and moving in a slow arc around the perimeter of their campsite. It circled them for 20 minutes. Nobody in the tent spoke. Sandra had her hand on Dennis's arm. The boys, both teenagers who had spent the previous 2 days acting aggressively unimpressed by nature, were completely silent. 20 minutes of that rhythmic thump moving around them in the dark, never accelerating, never breaking pattern, never stopping. And then the weather radio turned on. They hadn't touched it. It was a hand-crank emergency unit sitting on top of the gear bag at the foot of the tent, and it powered on by itself. Dennis reached for it instinctively and stopped with his hand an inch away, because underneath the static, woven into it, almost like the static itself was being shaped, was a sound that was almost a voice. He told Sandra to listen. She heard it too. Both boys heard it. It took them a moment to isolate it from the noise, and then it was impossible to unisolate. 3 words repeating. Not wood, not wood, not wood. The cadence was human. The rhythm was human. The spacing between repetitions followed the natural pause pattern of spoken English in a way that randomized static simply does not produce. Something was using the radio's frequency to push 3 words into that campsite, on loop, for 47 seconds before the unit cut to silence. The thumping stopped at the same moment the radio went quiet. I've spent a long time with those 2 words, not wood, trying to understand what they're warning against, or describing, or declaring. Something that might be mistaken for wood, or compared to wood, announcing that the comparison is wrong. Whatever Bigfoot is made of, whatever moves through its body, the way blood moves through ours, it apparently felt strongly enough about the distinction to say so. Twice a second for 47 seconds into a dead radio in a dark gorge in southern Ohio. What nobody realized yet was that a game warden was already awake before sunrise the next morning, driving toward Wayne National Forest to answer a livestock call. And what he found in that clearing had no explanation that any wildlife manual has ever prepared anyone for. Zach was 9 hours into his overnight carnivore rotation at the zoo, doing what he always did on late shifts, moving quietly, moving carefully, keeping his flashlight low so he didn't spook the cats before their 2 a.m. welfare checks. The rain had stopped maybe an hour earlier, but it left everything slicked over. The concrete pathways, the steel service railings, the mesh fencing that separated the tiger habitat from the maintenance corridor he was walking. Every surface caught the amber glow of the security floods and threw it back distorted, like the whole zoo had been dipped in oil. He remembers thinking it was actually beautiful for about 30 seconds. He remembers exactly when those 30 seconds ended. Bigfoot was already inside the enclosure, standing in the center of the wet yard under the security floods. And Bigfoot was enormous, not the vague, blurry enormous of a shaky video, but the concrete, undeniable enormous of something that was actually there. 8.5 feet of muscle and dark matted fur glistening with rainwater, standing upright with a weight and a presence that made the entire enclosure feel small. One of Zach's Bengal tigers, Kieran, their 7-year-old male, 480 pounds, was crumpled against the far retaining wall. His neck was wrong. The second tiger moved before Zach could process what he was seeing. Asha, their 6-year-old female, 340 pounds, the fastest animal in that facility, came out of the far corner of the yard like a missile. She did not circle. She did not posture. She launched herself directly at Bigfoot's throat with the kind of commitment that tigers reserve for kills, and Bigfoot was already turning, already moving, dropping low and fast in a way that had absolutely no right to happen at that size. Bigfoot moved like something that had been in fights before and had opinions about how they ended. Asha's jaws closed on Bigfoot's forearm instead of the throat she was aiming for, and Zach heard the impact, the wet crunch of teeth finding flesh. And Bigfoot made a sound that was not pain and not surprise, but something harder and colder than either. Bigfoot swung, not a swipe. A full, two-handed rotating swing that took Asha off her feet and drove her into the concrete retaining wall with a force that Zach felt in his sternum from 60 feet away. Asha hit the wall and dropped, and for one terrible second, he thought she was gone too. Then she was up, shaking her head, blood on her muzzle that wasn't hers, already repositioning. Bigfoot's forearm was torn open. Zach could see the lacerations from where he stood, deep, raking wounds that would have finished a fight with any normal animal. A chunk of dark fur hung loose from Bigfoot's left shoulder. None of it mattered. Bigfoot reset, low and wide, weight forward, and Zach realized he was watching something that was not reacting to damage the way animals react to damage. Bigfoot was filing it away. Bigfoot was adjusting. Zach crouched behind the utility cart beside the corridor wall, and his radio hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Dispatch picked up on the third call, and he kept his voice at a whisper because he could feel, not hear, feel, the vibration in his chest cavity every time a tiger vocalized. And the tigers were vocalizing constantly now, and he knew with absolute certainty that if Bigfoot registered his movement before backup arrived, he was going to become a secondary problem. Then the transfer chute latch failed. He heard it go, a sharp metallic crack from the east side of the enclosure, and the third tiger came through. Zach stopped thinking about the radio. What happens next will make everything you just heard feel like the quiet before a storm. Because when 3 tigers begin to hunt together and Bigfoot refuses to run, the zoo stops being a zoo and becomes something else entirely. And this is a promise. Nobody, not the tigers, not Bigfoot, and especially not Zach, is walking out of the service corridors unchanged. Zach ran. That is the honest version. There is no tactical framing for what his legs did the moment the transfer chute latch gave out and the third tiger, Rajan, their oldest male, 510 pounds of scar tissue and bad history, came barreling into the yard. He turned and he ran, and the radio bounced against his hip, and the wet concrete tried to take his feet out from under him twice in the first 20 yards. Behind him, the sounds compounded into something that stopped resembling individual noises and became a single continuous wall of violence. Steel, fur, impact, vocalization, and underneath all of it, the low rhythmic force of something large moving very fast. The backstage zoo is not built for sprinting. It is built for cart traffic and slow walks with feed buckets. And every corner is a blind one, and every doorway is narrower than you want it to be when your only goal is more distance. Zach pushed through the double doors into the food prep hall, refrigeration units lining the left wall, stainless steel prep counters down the center, the smell of raw meat hanging in the cold air. And he got on the radio again. He told dispatch tigers were loose. He did not tell them about Bigfoot yet, because he needed them to actually come, and some information is too heavy to drop on someone over a scratchy radio at 2 a.m. The alarms found him there. Not the enclosure alarm he'd heard at the start. The full facility cascade, habitat by habitat, triggering in sequence as the monitoring system registered motion. In places motion was not supposed to be. The food prep hall filled with red emergency light, and the pulse of the alarm buried itself in his back teeth, and he understood then that the fight had already moved. Bigfoot and all 3 tigers, 2 still functional, 1 he wasn't sure about, were no longer contained to the secondary yard. They were in the zoo. He pulled up remote gate access on the panel beside the prep hall exit, a gray metal box bolted to the cinder block wall with a laminated instruction sheet taped above it that nobody had ever needed to actually use at speed. He started closing sections. The hydraulic gate at Junction 4, which sealed the carnivore complex off from the Reptile House Service Road, began to close on his screen. He watched the indicator bar move. Then it stopped at 60%. The bar turned yellow. Gate obstruction detected, it said. He had never seen that error before. He stared at it for 2 full seconds. Then he heard the steel groan. The gate was wrecked open, and Bigfoot was through, and behind Bigfoot came the tigers like water through a break. Zach left the panel and ran deeper. He was moving along the left wall when the ambush happened, and it was not his ambush. One of the tigers, he believes it was Asha, based on the direction, though he had stopped being certain of anything, had looped ahead through a parallel access gate that had failed in the initial alarm cascade. She came out of the ornamental hedge border beside the reptile house entrance and hit Bigfoot from the side with her full 340 pounds, and Bigfoot went down. Zach stopped. He could not help it. In all the chaos of the last 15 minutes, Bigfoot had not gone down. Not once. Not for an impact, not for a wound, not for anything. Bigfoot hit the asphalt on one knee and both palms, and for one suspended moment, Zach genuinely believed he was about to watch a tiger end this. Asha's jaws found Bigfoot's shoulder, and her back legs raked, and she was doing real damage. He could see it, could see Bigfoot's body registering it differently than before. And then Rajan came in from the front. Bigfoot's hand found Asha's face. The gouging was direct and immediate, and will not be described in full, but Asha released. Bigfoot stood with her still partially in his grip and drove her into the asphalt with the kind of force that left a smear. And Rajan was already on Bigfoot's back, and the 3 of them became a single thrashing mass against the reptile house wall, and Zach pressed himself into the drainage alcove across the road and tried to become part of the cinder block. That was when Asha disengaged. She did not retreat far, 12 feet, maybe 15. But she turned, and she was low, and she was looking directly at Zach. A tiger stalking is almost silent. That is the thing people do not understand. All the noise is the tiger's choice, and when a tiger decides not to make noise, the silence is worse than anything. Asha moved toward Zach in that silence, and he was trapped. The equipment cage locked behind his left shoulder, an overturned golf cart on his right, the alcove giving him nowhere that wasn't directly at her. She dropped her haunches. She was 3 seconds from a charge that he was not going to survive. Bigfoot hit her sideways like a freight train, not intentionally saving Zach. To be precise about that, Bigfoot was pursuing, and Zach happened to be the direction Asha had moved, and the collision happened 6 feet in front of him, and the wind from it was physical, but the effect was the same. Asha was gone, tumbling into the service road, and Bigfoot thundered after her, and Zach stood in the alcove with his back against the locked equipment cage and understood that Bigfoot was pushing every dangerous animal in this facility directly toward the parts of the zoo where human beings were supposed to be safe. The fire suppression system chose that moment to activate. The sprinklers opened up across the entire reptile house roofline, and the service road turned to mist and red strobed chaos. And somewhere in that chaos, Bigfoot and the tigers moved toward the central walkway, and Zach climbed the nearest maintenance ladder because the ground no longer felt like a survivable option. Every exit Bigfoot has had, Bigfoot has ignored. Every opportunity to retreat into the dark outside that bent east gate, Bigfoot has passed up. Something is keeping Bigfoot in this zoo. What does Bigfoot actually want in here? Zach had eyes on Bigfoot again from the ladder. Bigfoot was moving through the central walkway in a low, fast track, and the two functional tigers, Rajan ahead, Asha cycling behind, were running a pattern that Zach recognized from watching the cats work during feeding enrichment. One draws attention forward, one closes from behind. They were not doing this because they had agreed on it. They were doing it because tigers are built for exactly this, and even in the worst night of their lives, they were still tigers. The decorative light posts were going down as Bigfoot and the cats collided and separated and collided again. Not knocked over, torn out, the concrete bases cracking, the posts going sideways into the planters and the kiosk displays and the permanent zoo map board that had stood at the main intersection since before Zach was hired. A bench became shrapnel. The glass front of a seasonal photo display shattered outward across the walkway, and he heard it from 40 feet up and felt it in his jaw. Zach moved along the ladder track toward the gift shop overhang because it was the only elevated position with a solid platform, and because dispatch had told him, through 6 seconds of broken radio contact, that units were en route, but still 11 minutes out. 11 minutes. He had been saying that number to himself like a prayer and a curse simultaneously. Bigfoot went through the gift shop window before Zach reached the platform. Not through the door. Through the south display window, the one with the seasonal stuffed animal display and zoo logo decal. It didn't shatter so much as explode inward. The frame buckled and the fixtures collapsed with it. Bigfoot was already inside before the last shards hit the floor, and Rajan went straight through the broken frame after it because Rajan had never once in his life let a pursuit end on anyone else's terms. Zach reached the maintenance platform above the gift shop roof and found the crawl space access hatch, and he went in because inside was higher ground and the platform was exposed, and what he needed more than anything was a layer of something between him and the ground floor. The crawl space above the gift shop ceiling was 18 inches of insulation bat and electrical conduit, and the kind of darkness that is not just the absence of light, but the absence of reassurance, and he moved through it on his forearms and knees and tried to track the fight by sound alone. He heard them go in sequence, like dominoes made of steel and merchandise, each impact traveling up through the ceiling panels and into his palms and kneecaps as he crawled. Tiger claws on tile are a specific sound once you know it, a rapid, skating scrape, like someone dragging a handful of nails across a hardwood floor, and Zach tracked Rajan by that sound, moving in tight circles below him. Bigfoot's movements registered differently, heavier, more deliberate, occasional concussive impacts when Bigfoot hit a wall or a fixture. The ceiling panels flexed under his weight, and he slowed down and tried to distribute himself over as many joists as he could find by touch, because the last thing he needed was to come through the ceiling into the middle of that. Then Bigfoot went quiet. However, Zach could still feel the weight displacement through the structure. But the random, reactive movement stopped, and what replaced it was something methodical, and he tracked it from above and understood what he was seeing 3 or 4 seconds before it finished happening. Bigfoot was moving along the far aisle wall, the narrow aisle between the souvenir clothing rack and the back stockroom door, and Rajan was at the aisle entrance. Bigfoot was not retreating down that aisle. Bigfoot was positioning at the far end of it, using the walls, using the length, waiting for Rajan to commit to the narrow space where Bigfoot's reach advantage would be absolute, and Rajan's ability to circle would be 0. Rajan went in. Of course, Rajan went in. He was 510 pounds of territorial predator, and he had never encountered anything that set up a kill lane for him. So his nervous system didn't have a category for what he was walking into. The sound that came up through the ceiling panels is not one to try to describe in clinical terms. It was structural. It lasted about 8 seconds. Then it stopped. Zach lay flat in the crawl space and did not move. The emergency exit on the north side of the gift shop blew open. He heard the crash bar give, and what remained of the fight spilled back outside into the rain, and Zach started moving toward the roof hatch because staying in that crawl space while Bigfoot was directly below him was its own category of danger. He got to the hatch and he pushed it open, and he looked out across the zoo pathways from the roofline, and he saw what the last 40 minutes had actually done to this place. There were bodies on the paths, tigers, at least 2 that Zach could identify from above, positioned in places that told him Bigfoot had been moving through this zoo for longer than he had known, longer than the first alarm, longer than he wanted to calculate. Blood trails connecting points of violence, like a map of something he did not want to understand. The rain was coming back, light and cold, and the emergency strobes painted everything in intervals of red, and he gripped the roof hatch frame and breathed and tried to count what was left. Everything Zach just witnessed, the crawl space, the gift shop, the bodies on the paths. Was Bigfoot working through the zoo with room to move? The next setting is different. This is where Bigfoot starts bleeding. The Primate Canyon is the oldest section of the zoo. It was built in an era when zoo design meant excavating a natural depression and letting the terrain do the containment work, and the result is something that feels less like an exhibit and more like a wound in the earth. Zach came down from the gift shop roofline via the exterior service ladder on the east face and hit the ground moving because staying elevated and stationary was survivable only as long as nothing decided to look up. He tracked the fight by sound into the canyon approach path, and the sounds were different now, tighter, more vertical. The tigers had found their terrain. Bigfoot was struggling with the cliffs in a way Bigfoot had not struggled with anything else all night, and the tigers knew it, the way predators always know when the geometry has shifted in their favor. Rudgeon was gone. Zach had processed that from the roofline, filed it somewhere cold and small, but Asha was still functional, still precise, and she had picked up a partner he hadn't expected. The third tiger, the one from the transfer chute, who Zach now realized had been moving through the zoo on a parallel track this entire time. Her name was Priya. She was 4 years old, the youngest cat in the facility, and she was fast in a way that even Asha wasn't, low-slung and explosive. And she had apparently spent the last 40 minutes in the canyon already. They came at Bigfoot from 2 elevations simultaneously. Priya from a ledge platform 8 feet up, dropping onto Bigfoot's back with all 4 sets of claws deployed, and Asha straight in from the canyon floor, targeting the left leg. Bigfoot buckled, not collapsed, buckled, one knee down, weight forward onto both hands, and Zach heard Bigfoot make a sound that was not the cold, controlled sound from earlier in the night. This was something rawer, something that acknowledged damage. Priya was raking across Bigfoot's upper back, and the blood was visible even in the emergency light. Black stripes appearing across the dark fur, and Asha had Bigfoot's calf in her jaws and was pulling. And Zach thought, for the first sustained moment since this night began, that he might be watching Bigfoot die. Then he slipped. The embankment path that runs along the canyon's east rim is packed clay over a drainage substrate, and the rain had been working on it, and his left foot went out from under him on a clay shelf that had become a clay slide. And he went down the embankment on his side for about 15 feet before a root cluster stopped him. He was on the canyon floor. He was on the canyon floor, and he was maybe 30 feet from the fight, and both tigers had heard him land. Asha released Bigfoot's leg. Priya stopped raking. They both looked at Zach, and in the strobing red emergency light, their eyes were flat and reflective and ancient, and every animal behavior training he had ever received crystallized into a single sentence in his head. Do not run, do not crouch, make yourself large. He stood up. He raised his arms. His ankle was wrong, not broken, but wrong. A hot, grinding wrongness that meant he was not sprinting out of this canyon. And he stood there with his arms up and his radio in one hand, and he looked at 2 tigers, and Bigfoot looked at all 3 of them, and for approximately 2 seconds, the entire canyon was completely still. Then Bigfoot moved and everything exploded again. Zach ran anyway. The ankle made every stride a negotiation, and he lost most of them, but forward was the only direction that made sense, and he took it, up the rope bridge spanning the canyon's central gap, the bridge swaying and jerking as he hit it wrong-footed, the rope railings slick with rain. Behind him, the canyon erupted. He could hear Priya going up the cliff face after Bigfoot, claws finding purchase in the artificial rock, and Asha somewhere below and to his left, moving fast along the canyon floor. He went through a maintenance cave cut into the north cliff face, a low tunnel, maybe 5 feet high, 40 feet long, used for keeper access to the waterfall pump system. And he came out the other side onto the elevated platform above the waterfall pool and grabbed the railing and tried to breathe and tried to locate everything at once. Bigfoot was on the cliff above the waterfall. Priya was 12 feet below Bigfoot and closing. The waterfall hit the pool 20 feet below the platform Zach was standing on, and the mist from it had soaked everything, and the footing on the platform was as bad as the embankment had been. Priya launched from the cliff face. She was aiming for Bigfoot's back again, the same attack that had worked twice, and Bigfoot was already turning, tracking the movement, and what happened next happened in about a second and a half. Bigfoot caught Priya mid-leap, not deflected, caught both hands, the full weight of a 4-year-old tiger traveling at speed, and the momentum took them both off the cliff edge and into the waterfall pool 20 feet below. The impact sound was enormous. The splash was enormous. Zach gripped the platform railing and looked down, and the pool was white water and chaos. And then it was red water and chaos. And then it was slower, and Bigfoot surfaced, and Priya did not. Bigfoot stood in the pool with the water at mid-thigh, and the wounds were everywhere now. The ear was wrong, partially detached. The leg wounds from Asha's earlier work had reopened in the water. The back lacerations from Priya's raking were wide and dark. Bigfoot was breathing in a way Zach could see from 20 feet above, the whole massive chest working hard, limping toward the pool's edge, favoring the right side heavily. Asha watched from the canyon rim. She was not attacking. She was reading. Zach was watching her read and trying to calculate the distance to the zoo entrance and whether his ankle would hold it when Asha stopped reading and charged again. Pure aggression now. No more patience. No more geometry. Just a tiger who had been fighting for 40 minutes, deciding that clean technique was a luxury she could no longer afford. She nearly took his head off on the way past. Zach was on the walkway above the pool, not on the ground, and Asha's charged trajectory clipped the railing post 2 feet to his left, and the impact knocked him off his feet, and he went down hard on the platform decking and slid 3 feet toward the edge before his hands found a gap in the grating and held. 12 feet below him was the pool. He held the grating and did not go over and lay flat on the wet platform and listened to his ankle scream and watched Asha go into the pool after Bigfoot and felt the zoo entrance pulling at him like gravity. Bigfoot and the last tiger, moving toward the main gate. The zoo entrance plaza is the first thing visitors see and the last thing Zach ever expected to see, used like this. He came through the service gate on the plaza's south side, moving as fast as his ankle allowed, which was not fast, a lurching, compensated stride that cost him every other step, and he got behind the nearest ticket booth and put his back against it and took stock. The booth was wood frame with a fiberglass roof, and it would not stop anything that had survived this night, but it gave him a corner and a sight line, and that was enough. Bigfoot was in the center of the plaza. Asha was circling. This was not the Asha from earlier in the night. The precision was gone, the geometry was gone, the patient canyon rim reading was gone. What was left was a tiger who had been in continuous combat for the better part of an hour, who was cut across the left shoulder and favoring her right foreleg and bleeding from somewhere near her jaw that Zach couldn't precisely locate from his distance, and who had apparently decided that all the tactical patience in the world had failed to produce a result, and the only remaining option was to simply not stop. She was circling Bigfoot in a tight radius, 12 feet, 10 feet, and every third or fourth rotation she exploded inward for a frontal attack and then disengaged and reset and did it again. Not fainting, actually attacking every time with full commitment and absorbing the response and coming back. Bigfoot was absorbing her. That is the only word for it. Each attack landed something, claws, teeth, redirected momentum, and each response from Bigfoot cost something too. Another wound opened or reopened, more blood into the standing water that was now running in thin, dark rivulets between the plaza bricks toward the storm drains. Bigfoot was still upright and still functioning, but the breathing Zach had tracked from the waterfall platform was worse now, the whole upper body moving with each cycle. And the limp had become a list, a permanent slight lean to the right that told him the left leg was losing the argument with gravity. Zach was watching Bigfoot die slowly, and he was watching Asha die slowly, and he was 12 feet from the ticket booth wall in standing water, and he was doing the math on whether he could make the service gate behind him before either of them noticed the movement. He did not make the service gate. Asha's next charge broke from the circle earlier than the pattern suggested it should, and it came toward Zach instead of toward Bigfoot, and it cannot be said with certainty whether she had finally processed that he was there or whether her attack vector just happened to align with his position. But the result was the same. 340 pounds of tiger covering 30 feet in under 2 seconds, and he went left behind the ticket booth, and she hit the booth corner instead of him, and the entire structure shifted 18 inches on its foundation, and he went down in the water and came up against the gate bars with his back and grabbed them and held on. The booth was between them, 6 feet of wood frame and fiberglass. Asha hit it again from the side, and the roof cracked and one wall panel buckled inward, and Zach pressed against the gate bars and watched the booth disintegrate toward him in increments, and heard the police radios on the other side of the gate and heard them telling each other to hold, and he agreed with them and also needed them to stop holding immediately. Bigfoot came through the booth. The remaining wall panels went outward, and Bigfoot's hands found Asha in the wreckage, and what followed was not a fight in any structured sense. It was a conclusion. Asha's jaws found Bigfoot's throat in the first second, and the claws found Bigfoot's torso, and Bigfoot made the raw, damaged sound from the canyon and went down to both knees in the standing water, and Zach was 3 feet away, holding the gate bars and watching it happen at a distance that he can still measure in his nervous system. Years from now, Bigfoot's hands found Asha's lower jaw. Bigfoot's hands found Asha's body. The struggle was long, far longer than any of the other endings this night had produced, because Asha was not releasing, and Bigfoot was not releasing, and the water around both of them was going dark, and the rain was loud, and the police lights kept strobing blue and red across all of it like the world's worst ceremonial lighting. It ended without a definitive moment. It ended the way exhaustion ends things, gradually, then completely. Asha stopped moving in the flooded entrance lane, and Bigfoot knelt over her in the water and stayed there, and the plaza was quiet except for the rain and the idling police units and Zach's own breathing, which he was only partially in control of. Then Bigfoot stood, turned around, and Bigfoot looked at him. It stared with sustained, specific attention, and Zach was still holding the gate bars with both hands, and his ankle was a burning constant, and he had nowhere to go and no remaining option except to hold still and be looked at. The distance between them was maybe 15 feet. The emergency lighting had mostly failed by then, and what remained was the blue and red from the police units coming through the gate bars, and in that light, Bigfoot's eyes were dark and deep and completely, uncomfortably present. Zach did not move and did not speak. He held the gate bars and he looked back. Bigfoot then turned away from the gate, away from the police lights and wreckage, and toward the service tunnel beneath the zoo's south infrastructure. A low concrete passage, barely 5 feet high, used for utilities and drainage. Bigfoot just walked in, folding into the darkness with a calm that was worse than everything before it. The darkness swallowed Bigfoot in a few steps. Zach looked at the service tunnel for another few seconds. That's when he realized Bigfoot did not come here out of rage, or hunger, or confusion. Bigfoot came here because they built a wall through a door that was not theirs to close, and Bigfoot came to reopen it, the only way that registers to something that has been navigating this land since long before they started naming it. The corridor is still bisected, the claim is still contested, and whatever accounting Bigfoot came to settle on April 27th, the conditions that created it have not changed by a single degree. Todd Schaffer has been a game warden in southeastern Ohio for 19 years. Wednesday morning's call from a farmer on the eastern edge of Wayne National Forest was about to add something to that private inventory that Todd will carry for the rest of his life. 8 dead deer were arranged in a clearing approximately 200 yards inside the tree line from the farm's eastern fence. They were positioned in a rough circle, each carcass facing outward from the center. There was no blood, not a trace, no pooling beneath the bodies, no spatter on the surrounding vegetation, no staining on the ground. 8 deer with no external wounds and no blood. However, every neck was broken. All 8 snapped at the second cervical vertebra with a consistency that the state wildlife veterinarian who later examined the carcasses described as extraordinary. Whatever broke those necks did so with a precision that the vet, in 22 years of wildlife pathology, had never encountered in an animal attack. She told Todd it looked, mechanically, like a procedure. Then Todd found the shelter. It was built at the northern edge of the clearing, set back into the tree line just far enough that he'd missed it on his first 2 passes. A dome-shaped structure roughly 6 feet high and 8 feet across, constructed from living saplings that had been bent and woven together while still rooted in the ground. The weaving was the thing that stopped him. Every junction where 2 saplings crossed was secured in a knot that Todd photographed and later showed to a botanist at Ohio State, who identified the pattern as nothing in any indigenous or traditional construction method she could reference. The knots weren't just functional, they were symmetrical, each one a mirror of the UI, last tied with a consistency that implied either long practice or a cognitive relationship with structure that nobody has ever formally attributed to Bigfoot. Bigfoot. In the center of the shelter, on bare ground that had been cleared of leaf litter down to the soil, river stones had been arranged in a spiral. Smooth, palm-sized stones that had no business being 200 yards inside a forest with no creek nearby, carried in individually from somewhere else. Todd counted 31 of them. The spiral, when he photographed it from above by climbing a nearby oak, pointed in a single direction. He checked his compass twice. It pointed magnetic north with a precision that, as I later confirmed by overlaying his photograph on a topographic map, aimed directly at a specific ridge system 40 miles away. A ridge that sits directly above the Nelson Kennedy ledges. I didn't know that on Wednesday. Todd didn't know that on Wednesday, but something did, and it left 31 stones pointing at it in the middle of a forest in Morgan County before the sun came up. The next day, a deaf hunter in Shawnee sat down in a blind before sunrise, and Bigfoot walked up and talked to him, and what it said is remarkable.